Snow lay in pale drifts along the wooden fences of Hartwell County, the late winter wind carrying the scent of pine and wood smoke across the open plain. The afternoon sun sat low, washed in a pale gold haze, and wagons rolled steadily toward the manor house at the edge of town, a sprawling estate of cut stone and tall windows, built by Eastern hands but kept standing by frontier grit. Folks said it was the closest thing to a palace this side of the Mississippi, and today it hosted the season's grand winter gathering. Horses stamped and snorted in the cold as guests stepped down in layers of wool, satin, and fur, their breath rising in white clouds that dissipated into the still air. She arrived without announcement, seated in the back of a modest wagon driven by a hired hand who did not speak except when necessary. She wore a simple dark gown, serviceable, clean, nothing to draw attention, and a cloak mended more than once. The other women watched her descend with expressions that hovered between curiosity and disdain, like they were waiting to see if she might stumble, falter, or show embarrassment. She did none of those things. She thanked the driver softly, gathered her skirts, and walked toward the entrance with calm steps. Yet beneath the surface of her quiet poise, her heart beat with a rapid, heavy force she fought to conceal. People remembered her family. Once they had been respected ranch owners, prosperous, well-regarded, known for breeding some of the finest horses in the territory. But the scandal had come swift and merciless. Whispers of mishandled funds, unpaid debts, and her father's sudden disappearance had turned admiration to suspicion, and suspicion to condemnation. She had not spoken of him since. She had taken work where she could, sewing, tutoring, tending, surviving. The invitation to the gathering had come from the lady of the house, an old friend of her late mother, written with kindness but sent into a world of judgment. Inside, the ballroom shimmered with lamplight and polished brass. Fiddlers played a lively reel, boots and slippers tapped across the polished wood floor. The scent of roast venison and mulled cider drifted from the adjoining dining hall. Laughter swirled among the guests, rising and fading like rolling dust across open plains. Yet when she entered, a subtle shift coursed through the room, as though the current of conversation turned and pooled around her. She did not look away. She met no one's eyes long enough for pity to settle there. She moved with the same quiet steadiness she had carried since the day her world had collapsed. She found a place near the refreshment table, neither hiding nor calling attention, content to observe, to breathe, to remain untouched by the elaborate dances of pride and vanity unfolding around her. He stood near the far end of the room, tall and unmistakable even among finely dressed men. The Duke, though the title felt almost foreign here in the rugged territories, had come west to oversee the expansion of his late uncle's landholdings. A man born to English courts and pressured expectations, now walking among frontier folk with a bearing that spoke of command even when silent. His coat was midnight blue wool, his boots polished but worn at the creases, his gaze sharp as cold steel beneath the sun. He was speaking with a cluster of men, local ranchers, politicians, merchants. His voice carried the smooth, controlled tone of someone accustomed to being listened to. Yet there was a tension in his shoulders, a rigidity that suggested he endured the conversation more than enjoyed it. He glanced around the room now and then, like a man searching for something he could not name. When his gaze passed her, he gave no sign of recognition, not even curiosity. She had expected nothing else. But others noticed. A group of young women, bright-eyed and heavily perfumed, gathered near a marble pillar, whispering behind gloved hands. Some watched the Duke with hope. Others watched the heroine with something closer to triumph already forming in their eyes. Gossip had always loved her best when it thought her defeated. The moment happened swiftly, too swiftly to brace for. One of the men spoke the heroine's name. The syllables hung in the warm air. A careless reference barely noticed. But someone nearby laughed, a short, unkind sound. The Duke, perhaps unaware of being overheard, responded with a tone sharpened by long habit and concealed discomfort. "She is the last woman I would ever consider as bride." The room did not go silent, not fully, fiddles still played, boots still shifted, but something changed. Conversation faltered. Heads turned. The whisper traveled like dust swept by a hard wind, settling in every corner before it was finished being spoken. She felt the words as though they had struck her. Not because she had expected anything else, she had not, but because it was one thing to be overlooked quietly, and another to be dismissed publicly. Her throat tightened. Her hands, hidden within her gloves, curled into small, controlled fists. She did not cry. She did not flee. She did not ask for sympathy. She simply stepped back from the table, smoothing her skirts with practiced poise, and walked toward the open doors leading onto the veranda, where the cold air waited like a refuge. Outside, snowflakes drifted slow and silent from a pale sky. The world was still. The wooden railing was cold beneath her gloved fingers as she leaned forward, drawing breath that stung her lungs but steadied her thoughts. She watched the fields beyond the manor, wide, white, and quiet. Open country did not judge. Snow did not whisper. Inside the ballroom, laughter resumed. Music grew louder again. The Duke did not look after her, not at first. But eventually he did. He turned toward the veranda just as she stepped into the dusk, her cloak brushing softly behind her. His eyes followed the trace of her movement, and something in his expression, only visible for an instant, was not cruelty nor triumph nor indifference. It was recognition. Like a man realizing the echo he had heard for years was a voice calling his name. The wind lifted her hair. She did not turn back. Yet as she crossed the threshold into the snowlit quiet, the Duke found his chest unexpectedly tight, as though some hidden cord had been drawn taut without warning, pulling him forward though his feet did not move. No one else noticed. But he felt it, and so did she. Snow thickened over Hartwell County in the weeks that followed, layering rooftops, silencing roads, and softening even the harshest landscape with its quiet, pale weight. Winter had a way of revealing character. Some folks became generous in the cold, sharing warmth wherever possible. Others grew sharper as though scarcity honed the edges of their hearts. The heroine found herself steady in routine, though her days were long and humble. She rose before dawn to help at the small schoolhouse, taught letters to children whose parents could not afford tutors, and brought food where it was needed. She asked nothing in return. In a place where pride was currency, her willingness to work with her hands made her the subject of both admiration and condescension. Rumors had not forgotten her. They clung close, rising again whenever conversation faltered. Yet gossip shifted now, shaded by something less predictable, uncertainty. For she did not act like one who sought redemption, nor like one who was ashamed. She simply lived. And living quietly with dignity can be the loudest statement of all. The Duke entered her days in small, unspoken ways. At first she believed them accidents. A wagon passing by just as she finished a long walk in snow. A worn basket of apples left on the schoolhouse steps on a morning when she had been ill. A warm pair of gloves set beside her seat at Sunday service with no name attached. These were not grand gestures nor public ones. They were subtle, nearly invisible, the kind of kindness offered only by someone who wished to remain unseen. But she saw him, of course. She always had. He crossed her path at the market one afternoon, the sky the color of tarnished pewter, snow falling in slow, steady flakes. He stood among the ranchers and traders, speaking softly to the blacksmith about ordering new tools for the winter. She approached to purchase flour, head lowered in focus, though she felt his eyes before she ever looked his way. When she lifted her gaze, he inclined his head, not with pomp nor cold distance, but with a quiet respect. She returned the gesture, though her pulse fluttered. Not a word passed between them. None was needed. The moment itself was enough to leave a shift in the air, a fine thread connecting two people who claimed no connection. It was soon after that the scandal began. The nature of gossip is that it never travels alone. It comes with embellishment. A visiting merchant's wife, eager for entertainment, announced during supper that the heroine was setting her sights upward, that she had taken advantage of the Duke's civility. Others added to the story piece by piece until it grew teeth. They said she lingered where he walked. They said she spoke of him softly with hope in her voice. They said she had designs on his fortune, his house, his name. The Duke heard the rumors secondhand at the local tavern. He did not react at first. But as two men laughed over the idea, snickering into their ale, one calling her pretty enough for desperation, the other remarking how a fallen family might claw its way back, the Duke's jaw tightened. He set his glass down with a force that quieted the room for a beat, though he did not speak a word. His silence was sharp. The men looked away. He returned to his estate that night unsettled, pacing before the fire. He did not regret his protectiveness. He regretted that he had not spoken sooner. The memory of his carelessness at the winter gathering, the words spoken too easily, too public, too sharp, came back to him with something very much like shame. As for her, she learned of the rumors in the hushed voice of a shopkeeper who meant well. She listened without flinching, though her cheeks grew pale beneath the lamplight. She did not defend herself. Defense often sounded like guilt. Instead, she thanked the shopkeeper, purchased what she needed, and walked into the evening snow with careful breaths. It was not the first time her character had been made a matter of public entertainment. It was simply the newest story others told about her life, as though it belonged to them. Yet something had changed. This time the Duke was part of the tale. She found herself alone on the road one night, traveling from the schoolhouse after staying late to tend a sick child. Snow fell heavier than expected, the wind rising in long hollow sighs across the fields. The cold bit through her cloak. Her boots soaked through. Each step grew slower, her strength thinning with the daylight. When a lantern glow appeared ahead, she thought at first it was a house or a barn. But as it drew closer, she recognized the form of a carriage. The Duke's, unmistakably carved and drawn by two dark-coated horses with breath steaming in the winter air. It stopped beside her with quiet purpose, not surprise. He stepped down before the driver could assist him. Snowflakes clung to his coat and hair. His eyes, usually guarded, held something raw, concern unmasked. "You should not walk home in this weather," he said. The words were simple, yet they vibrated with meaning he could not quite shape. She stood still, gathering the last of her steadiness. "I had not expected it to worsen so quickly." "It is not the storm that concerns me," he said softly. Snow fell between them, settling on the road, the horses, their coats, their eyelashes. The world felt muted, suspended. She could have refused. Pride would have allowed it. But survival and something deeper she dared not name guided her. She accepted his offered hand and stepped into the carriage. It was warm inside, a small lantern casting golden light over dark wood. As the driver flicked the reins and the horses moved forward, the carriage rocked gently, carrying them through the silent white. They did not speak. Yet in the quiet, something shifted, in him, in her, in whatever stood between them. The winter night carried them forward, and though the town's whispers gathered like storm clouds behind them, neither could pretend any more that they were strangers. The carriage moved steadily through the snow, wheels whispering over the frozen road, lantern casting a warm, flickering circle of light against the deep winter night. Outside, the land lay quiet and unbroken, fields of white stretching to the dark line of distant pines. Inside, the air was close, touched with the scent of wool, pine oil, and the faint warmth of bodies kept near by necessity, yet held apart by pride. She sat with gloved hands folded neatly in her lap, gaze lowered, the rise and fall of her breath slow and controlled. Across from her, the Duke rested one hand against the window frame, watching the snow drift past as though the world outside could offer answers he had never learned to name. He had offered her the carriage because no decent man would leave someone to walk home through a worsening storm. That alone should have been explanation enough. And yet explanation was not what hung between them. What hung there was his name on the lips of the town. Her name spoken with implication. His silence where defense should have been. And above all, the memory of his voice at the winter gathering, words sharp enough to wound even when unintentional. He cleared his throat, not to speak, but because silence had begun to weigh too heavily for either of them to bear. She looked up then, not to challenge, not to plead, but simply to see him. Her eyes were steady, though there was something tired behind them, a fatigue born not of this night, but of many nights before it. "I owe you an apology," he said at last, the words halting as though unfamiliar. "For that evening. For what I said." She did not immediately respond. The carriage swayed gently. Snow tapped softly against the glass. "I heard," she began, her voice quiet but clear, "what you said was pride speaking. Or perhaps fear. It stung, but I do not believe you meant cruelty." His gaze flicked to her sharply, as though she had struck closer to truth than he expected. He inhaled slowly, the rise of his chest deliberate. "I was raised to believe that attachment is weakness," he said. "That sentiment clouds judgment, and vulnerability invites disappointment. Admiration, loyalty, marriage, these things I was told must be negotiated with care, not surrendered to impulse." His hands tightened slightly. "And yet I have been undone by a glance across a room." The lantern light glowed against her cheek. A faint touch of pink rose there, though she did not look away. Her voice softened, losing none of its steadiness. "You are not undone," she said. "You are simply seeing clearly for the first time." He let out a strained breath, somewhere between a laugh and a sigh. "You speak as though I have any clarity to claim." "You do," she answered. "Otherwise you would not have left apples on the schoolhouse steps. Or sent gloves. Or insured a wagon past the road at dusk. Kindness does not hide itself even when pride demands it do so." The carriage slowed for a turn. The horses' hooves crunched through drifts of new snow. His eyes closed briefly as though the acknowledgment was both relief and wound. "You knew," he murmured. "I suspected," she replied. "And I chose not to speak of it." Her hands tightened in her lap. "Because I did not want to believe you only acted from guilt." He sat forward then, not to intimidate but because something in him finally cracked. The shell of detachment, the practiced indifference of a man taught to feel only in private. It was not guilt, he said, voice low. It was something I have no name for. When I look at you I see, not your father's ruin, not society's whispers, not a lesson to be learned, only you. And it frightens me. Not because you are unworthy, but because I may not deserve the peace I find in your presence. Her breath caught, not from surprise, but from the quiet honesty in his tone. She looked away for a moment, toward the window where snow and darkness blurred into one. I have known loss, she said, and ridicule, and the weight of silence. I have rebuilt myself from what others thought broken. So if you seek forgiveness I can offer it. But if you seek absolution, her gaze returned to his, steady, tender, that is something you must grant yourself. He leaned back slowly as though her words had settled into him, grounding him in a way he did not know he needed. The carriage rocked gently onward. The world outside remained still, but something inside the small cabin shifted, something that could not be undone. His hand moved slightly, resting on the seat beside him. Not reaching for hers, not presuming, simply offering the space between them as invitation. After a breath, she placed her hand lightly atop his. The touch was small, understated, yet the meaning reverberated like thunder in a silent valley. No declaration was spoken. None was needed. When the carriage reached her doorstep, he stepped down first, offering his hand to her once more. She accepted. Snow drifted around them, settling in their hair and on their coats. She looked up at him, and he at her, and the stillness between them was full of words neither quite dared to speak aloud. "Good night," she said softly. He held her hand a moment longer than etiquette allowed. "Good night." She stepped inside. He returned to the carriage, though he did not give the order to move for several long breaths. Morning came with a letter. The lady of Hartwell Manor, ever mindful of status and alliance, had invited him to a gathering the following week. And within the letter lay more than invitation, it carried expectation. A match arranged. A bride selected. A union that would stabilize influence, wealth, and reputation. The Duke read the letter twice. Then again. The carriage ride, the touch of her hand, the fragile truth shared in the lantern glow, all of it settled like a weight in his chest. The world had chosen a path for him. And now he would have to decide whether to walk it. The snow outside fell soft as whispered promises, promises that would soon demand to be kept or broken. The night of the winter ball arrived like a stage lit for judgment. Lanterns burned in tall iron sconces outside Hartwell Manor, their flames wavering in the cold wind. Horses pawed the frozen ground, steam rising from their flanks as coaches arrived one after another. The world seemed wrapped in silence and ceremony, yet beneath it ran a tension bright as drawn wire. The snow was falling again, slow, steady, unhurried, as though nature itself meant to witness what the night would reveal. Inside, the ballroom glowed with lamplight and polished brass, the fiddle and piano guiding dancers across the gleaming oak floor. Women wore gowns of deep velvet and winter-white satin. Men stood tall in dark coats with fresh-pressed linen. Every guest knew why this evening mattered. Whispers traveled easily, weaving through the crowd like smoke. The Duke was expected to announce his engagement to the daughter of a wealthy cattle baron, a match that would restore influence and secure land rights, a union of advantage rather than affection. People had been speaking of it for days, with approval, with envy, with triumph. She arrived quietly as she always did, wrapped in a dark cloak dusted with snow. She had not wanted to attend, yet declining would have drawn more whispers, more assumptions that humiliation had broken her. She would not be broken. She stepped into the ballroom with measured grace, though her pulse beat steady against her ribs. Conversations faltered. A few turned their faces politely. Others looked through her as though she were a shadow cast where light was not wanted. She did not shrink. Her chin remained lifted, her breath calm. The Duke stood near the center of the room, surrounded by guests. His expression was composed, as though he wore a mask carved into civility. But the moment his eyes found her, the faintest crack appeared, barely visible yet undeniable. He took a breath, one that appeared shallow, as though the air itself had turned heavier. She did not look away. Her gaze met his evenly, unguarded but not pleading. She felt no shame in being seen by him. Whatever existed between them, it had been forged in honesty, not spectacle. A woman at his side touched his arm, his expected bride. She was elegant, poised, practiced in social grace. Her smile held no warmth, only certainty. She was the choice that made logical sense. The future drawn in straight lines. The path he had been expected to follow since birth. The music shifted to a waltz. Couples gathered to the floor. Laughter lifted. The Duke did not move. The woman beside him waited for him to offer his hand. He did not. Instead, his gaze remained fixed on the one woman the room believed beneath his notice. The silence of that refusal was louder than any spoken declaration. Whispers rose with startling speed. She dares look at him still? Perhaps the rumors are true. He cannot mean, surely he would not. But he already had. The heroine turned slightly, intending to slip away before attention tightened like a snare. She would not stand as spectacle. She would not be pointed at. She knew too well the cruelty of eyes. But as she stepped back, her foot touched the hem of her gown and she faltered. Not enough to stumble, only enough that she felt the old sting of vulnerability. He moved. Not with hesitation. Not with caution. He crossed the ballroom floor with purpose. Straight line, unbroken stride, cutting through the swaying dancers and startled guests. Gasps rose. Fans trembled. Men straightened. The music faltered, the piano's notes blinking uncertainly into silence. He reached her. Her breath caught. She did not look down or away. Her voice, when it came, was quiet, nearly lost to the charged hush of the room. "You should not draw attention," she murmured. "It will cost you." "Perhaps," he said. His voice was low, steady, carrying clearly despite its softness. "Perhaps it already has." The cattle baron's daughter watched from across the room, her expression shifting from confusion to outrage. The weight of her family's expectation pressed like winter ice. But the Duke did not turn toward her. He did not offer explanation. His attention remained solely on the woman before him. He spoke, not loudly but with clarity meant to be heard by every listening ear. "I once believed myself above the need for companionship," he said. "I thought distance was strength, that affection could be chosen the way one chooses land or alliance." His gaze held hers, unwavering. "But I find I cannot draw breath in a room where you are asked to stand alone." The words fell into the silence like sparks on dry brush. A murmur swept the room, shock, disbelief, the first tremor of approaching conflict. She swallowed, her throat tight. Her voice came soft, barely more than breath. "You do not owe me this." "No," he said. "I owe myself the truth." He extended his hand, not commandingly, not possessively, but with the quiet offering of a man choosing vulnerability. Her hand hovered for a heartbeat, suspended between fear and certainty. If she accepted him, she would be stepping into fire. If she refused, she would deny the deepest truth of her own heart. She placed her hand in his. The ballroom erupted, not in applause nor in celebration, but in gasps and sharp whispers, the crackle of outrage igniting faster than any flame. The cattle baron's daughter turned sharply and walked away without waiting for courtesy. A cluster of influential men, the kind who believed decisions should be made by those who held land and money, exchanged looks that promised consequence. The Duke did not release her hand. The musicians hesitated, unsure whether to resume. The air was too charged, too heavy with shift. Conversation rose in harsh fragments. "The West will not forgive this. He throws away fortune. She has ensnared him. This will ruin them both." She felt her breath catch in her chest, not from fear alone, but from the overwhelming weight of being seen, truly seen for the first time. Not as emblem of scandal. Not as wounded pride. But as a woman chosen. The Duke leaned closer, his voice meant only for her. "Walk with me," he said. She nodded. They left the ballroom together, hand in hand. Outside, the snow was falling harder now, the night quiet except for the soft sweep of wind across the open country. The lanterns cast warm halos in the white darkness. Behind them, the ballroom rustled with turmoil. Ahead of them lay only unmarked snow. Their steps pressed parallel prints into the fresh drifts. Neither spoke. They did not need to. This was the moment before the consequences arrived. The moment love stepped forward and the world drew breath. Snow drifted in slow, endless spirals, gathering softly along the stone steps of Hartwell Manor as though winter itself paused to witness what had begun. The ballroom's muffled uproar faded behind them, but its weight followed, clinging to the Duke's shoulders like a cloak of iron expectation. He did not release her hand. She did not ask him to. Yet both understood that the world they stepped into now was not the same one they had left. They crossed the courtyard where lanterns glowed warm against the cold, their light flickering on snow-dusted pine branches. The quiet was so complete that the sound of her breath, soft and steady, felt loud. She walked beside him, cloak pulled close, her steps sure despite the uncertainty ahead. The Duke's jaw was set, not in pride now but resolve. "Inside they will speak of us until dawn," she said. "Yes," he answered. "They will not speak kindly." "No," he said again. She looked up at him, her eyes searching, not for reassurance but for truth. "You chose the path that is hardest." "I chose the one that is mine," he replied. For the first time. She did not smile. She simply breathed, and the breath trembled, not from fear but from the depth of feeling she could no longer deny. They reached the far edge of the courtyard, where the world opened into white fields and fence lines drawn black against snow. The wind picked up, sending flakes swirling like scattered feathers. In that pale quiet, the Duke turned to her fully. "I grew up believing my life was not mine to shape," he said. "That everything I did must be measured, calculated, approved. I thought emotion was a fault to correct. And then I saw you, a woman who had lost everything but her dignity and refused to kneel to pity. You were stronger than any man I've ever known." Her breath caught, though her gaze held steady. He stepped closer, not in entitlement but in reverence. "You said forgiveness and absolution are not the same. I understand that now. I do not ask you to forget my failures, only to believe I mean to learn from them." She looked down briefly, the snow catching in her hair and lashes. "I feared you would choose what was expected of you," she admitted. "Not because you did not care, but because I did not think I could be enough to outweigh the world's demands." "You are the only part of it that ever felt real to me," he said softly. Silence settled, not empty but full. The door behind them opened. Heavy footsteps crossed the snow. The cattle baron approached, coat flaring in the wind, fury burning beneath his composed expression. 2 men followed at his side. He did not shout. His voice, when it came, was low and cutting, steel beneath velvet. "You have made a mockery of alliance and hospitality," he said. "My daughter has been humiliated before the county. You owe her restoration of honor." The Duke did not step back. "I owe her honesty. It would have been cruelty to bind her to a man whose heart lay elsewhere." "A heart is a simple thing to ignore," the Baron snapped. "Fortune is not." She stood still, though the cold now cut sharper. The Baron's gaze slid to her, sharp as a blade. "And you have brought ruin before. You bring it again. You will pull him down with you." The words landed like a blow, but she did not bend. Her voice, when she answered, was quiet and clear. "I have pulled no one anywhere. He walks by his own choice." The Baron scoffed. "Choice? You mistake sentiment for strength. The world is not moved by longing. It is moved by power." The Duke stepped forward, not threatening but unyielding. "Power means nothing if it is wielded without conscience." The Baron's jaw clenched. "You will regret this." "Perhaps," the Duke said. "But regret is easier to bear than a life lived in dishonesty." The wind rose, carrying the sound of distant music from the ballroom, now warped into frantic confusion. The Baron turned sharply, his coat flaring like a banner of surrender or warning. It was difficult to tell which. He and his men walked back toward the manor, but the final words he left behind cut the air. "Do not expect the territory to show kindness. The West has little patience for fairy tales." When they were gone, the night felt vast and fragile. She released a slow breath, as though she had been holding it for minutes, perhaps years. The Duke looked at her, searching her face for fear, regret, doubt. He found none. He took her hand again, gently, reverently, not as possession but as vow. "If you walk with me," he said, voice muted by the snowfall, "we will face every judgment, every whisper, every cold dawn together. I cannot promise ease. Only honesty. Only steadiness. Only the truth of what I feel." Her hand tightened in his. "I do not want ease," she replied. "I want something that survives winter." His breath shook, not from cold but relief. She stepped closer, their foreheads nearly touching, the snow gathering in their hair, their lashes, their shoulders. The lantern light behind them cast a soft, amber glow around the shape of their closeness. "Then say you will walk beside me," he whispered. "Even when the world would rather we stand apart." She closed her eyes, not in hesitation but acceptance. "So long as we walk toward kindness," she said, "I will not fear the path." There was no applause. No audience. No grand pronouncement. Only 2 figures in falling snow, their hands intertwined, the world vast and quiet before them. The ballroom lights glowed behind them like a past already fading. The snow kept falling, soft, steady, endless, as if blessing them.